So we are now recording the English and Spanish channels. Can someone give me a thumbs up if you see the interpretation button on the bottom of their screen? Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, we have people lining up in the waiting room.
And Linda got pulled into a meeting that she needs to deal with, but she's joining as soon as she's able.
Perfect.
There she is.
All right, make Linda co-host.
Hi, sorry I wasn't able to join earlier.
No problem.
Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, can everyone see the screen that I'm sharing? Okay, perfect. Cynthia, when would you like to start letting everyone in?
I think now would be terrific.
Okay, perfect.
Good morning. Please remember to mute yourself if you're not speaking. Thank you. Morning. Just waiting for a minute to get started. Welcome.
Morning.
All right, good morning, everyone. We are going to get started with the housekeeping rules. My name is Helena Rim. I'm at the California Air Resources Board in the Enforcement Division, and I'll be running the Zoom meeting in the background today. So before we jump in, I have a few housekeeping rules and interpretation instructions for Spanish speakers. So first and foremost, please keep yourself muted when you are not speaking. If you would like to ask a question, you can do so by messaging through the chat box, which we will be monitoring, or by raising your hand with the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you are joining by phone, you can raise or lower your hand by dialing *9, then unmuting and muting yourself by dialing *6. We ask folks again who are joining to please keep yourself muted. Thank you. So we also have live Spanish interpretation available for Spanish speakers today. You can join the Spanish line by selecting the interpretation button with the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom window, then click Spanish. And then to only hear the Spanish line, you can click mute original audio. And unfortunately, language interpretation on Zoom is only available for those joining on your desktop. And to all panelists and participants, please be sure to speak clearly and steadily for our interpreters. And last but not least, please note that this meeting is being recorded and that the recording will be shared publicly online. And that's it. I will now pass it over to one of our interpreters, Mark, to provide the instructions in Spanish.
Muy buenos días a todos que nos acompañan. Queremos darles la bienvenida y gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Queremos dejarles saber que tenemos interpretación al vivo para la sesión. Si desea escuchar el programa en español, por favor seleccione el icono del globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla que dice Interpretation o Interpretación. De ahí podrá seleccionar su idioma Spanish para español y podrá escuchar el programa enteramente en español. También en breve lanzaremos una encuesta que aparecerá en su pantalla. Por favor, tómese un momento para indicar el idioma en el que está escuchando el programa para hoy. Gracias. And please note, we're offering interpretation services for today's session. To listen to any comment or question given in Spanish, please select the globe icon at the bottom of your screen that says Interpretation, and then select your language, English. You'll then be able to hear a live rendering of that comment into English. I will also launch a poll in just a moment. It will appear on your screen. Please take a moment to indicate the language in which you're listening today. We'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you. And Robina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mark. Good morning, everyone. My name is Robina Sewell, and I'm the founder and executive director of California Safe Schools. I am also the co-coordinator, along with Cynthia Babbage, of the Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network, which was formed by frontline environmental justice communities and advocates more than 17 years ago. We've been meeting monthly since then to mentor and to help each other with issues in common, as well as ones specific to the communities we serve. We'd like to begin today's event by thanking our very generous sponsors, who are Community Environmental Services, the California Air Resources Board, Earth Justice, Los Angeles City Attorneys, California Environmental Protection Agency, Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, Sheila Kuehl, Janice Hahn, Holly Mitchell, and Hilda Solis, South Coast Air Quality Management District, and Cal Recycle. The Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network have worked together on toxic tours, ground truthing projects, groundwater convenings, rule makings at several different agencies. We've worked on policies and legislative issues, as well as environmental justice enforcement symposiums, and this is our 8th year. Over time, our groups have been joined in these efforts by many partners from state, local, and federal agencies, and regulators and academics, and many others. The past 11 years, we focused on problem solving around many of these issues that we've been working on for decades by applying boots on the ground knowledge to agency policy goals. We hope that these efforts will attain environmental clarity, which we believe will lead us to equity justice for our communities. We have an exceptional team of community and agency representatives within the Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network that plan our symposium. And this year's great team is comprised of the following: Stephanie Lewis, Department of Toxic Substances Control; Jessica Brown and Rosa Borelli of the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office; Todd Sachs and his enforcement team, and Daldy Reyes from the California Air Resources Board; Katie Butler, Senior Health Deputy from the Office of Supervisor Janice Hahn; Joe Liu from Coalition of Clean Air, Cynthia Babbage, Florence and Sarah Garibian from the Del Amo Action Committee, Jennifer Malone from Los Angeles County General Counsel, Kristen McKinley and Rachel Zwillinger from the California Environmental Protection Agency, and Susana Lugudas from the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board and California Safe Schools. Creating this space to hear one another allows us to continue to develop solutions in collaboration. And we strongly believe that this will lead to real and measurable change in the policies of agencies charged with the protection of our most vulnerable communities. So who is in the room here today with all of us? More than 100 have registered, and they represent environmental justice community and advocacy groups, universities and unions, consultants and foundations, enforcement agencies and prosecutors, water protectors, air regulation agencies, state and federal agencies, Los Angeles County departments, Los Angeles City departments, and local, state, and federal representatives. The Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network is proud of this space, and we welcome you all today for this extremely exceptional presentation. And it's now my pleasure and honor to introduce Deldy Reyes of the California Air Resources Board. She is a true champion and respected by all. And welcome, Deldy, and thank you so much for being here today. It's all yours.
Well, thank you, Rabina, and thank you, Cynthia, for creating this forum. And even more than that, really helping instill in the participants who regularly who attend and engage in this forum, that we are here to problem solve, that we do have respect for each other, want to understand each other's roles, and really work toward equity and justice for all communities. So thank you for this opportunity to be part of this amazing event. I'm so excited for the conversation we will have. So my role as the moderator is to just help guide us through the conversation, but it is really the panelists who are the stars today, and you, our participants, as you engage with them. So first, I want to share a little bit about how that will work. I want to also offer a personal reflection or two, and then I want to introduce our panelists. I'll save that right to the end of my remarks. So I'll start with some personal reflections. I've worked now in California for 12 years. I grew up in South Texas, a small border community, and really was my first experience of environmental injustice. And that and my mother inspired me to pursue a graduate degree in environmental science. And my very, very first job was as an inspector under the Clean Water Act of facilities that discharge pollutants into waters of the US. So that was my first job. I learned an awful lot. I also learned how enforcement back then in the 1990s worked at the federal level. There was very little room for communities to engage in the federal enforcement process. There were tips, complaints that community members could make that we were supposed to follow up on. But that was pretty much the long and short of it. There were no feedback loops. The enforcement process itself, for many, many good reasons, we needed to have confidential agreements, or space to work in a confidential way so that we could pursue cases and be successful in bringing those cases against violators. But over the years, I have had the amazing opportunity to keep learning about how our enforcement processes at the state, federal, and local levels are and really should be adapting to be much more responsive and centered around community priorities. When I first moved to California to take my first role with Region 9's EPA office to manage the environmental justice team, that was my introduction to Rabina and Cynthia and Luis as well. And it was all focused on work that we were going to try to do together with other state and local agencies along the I-710 corridor, because this was one of the communities that was continuing to see disproportionate impacts from all kinds of environmental insults. And it's been really exciting to see how those efforts have evolved. Some of the efforts have been led by government with community as partners. Some of the even more innovative efforts have been led by communities with government folks sitting in and learning from. So, and we'll get to hear about that later today from Luis Olmedo, Executive Director of Comité Cívico. And so my observation is that we have learned from each other. I think government has really learned how important accountability is, that no one likes to make a complaint and then just never hear. How'd that go, right? And so we are trying to be adaptive, and you'll hear about that response from our colleagues from Cal EPA on the main topic that they have to share with us today, which is about the MOU for enforcement, the Memorandum of Understanding, that we will all get a chance to talk about and engage in today. So that's a little bit about me and what I bring to this conversation. I also want to share a little bit about the Community Air Protection Program. In 2017, a law was passed that recognized the injustice over time and decades that leads to certain communities having disproportionately impactful air quality, poor air quality. And it really turned the Clean Air Act at the federal level kind of upside down by requiring that there be community-specific, local scale actions to improve air quality in specific communities and neighborhoods. And there were strategies that CARB's Office of Community Air Protection included in the first guidelines for that program, the guidelines that we call the blueprint. And chief among those strategies were the use of enforcement mechanisms and the recognition that collaboration is also essential to making those strategies come to life. So I'm pleased to say that we, together with the amazing partnership of our CARB Enforcement Division and the way that they're leading the way to help us think about enforcement in a community-focused way, we're really using 617 to help further those kinds of goals that we are working in partnership with air districts, working together to address concerns that communities have about both mobile sources and stationary sources. And also when we come up against challenges where neither of us has clear authority, that we're documenting what those concerns are in order to bring attention to those challenges and bring other parties to the table. So I'm excited to be part of that as well. But let me segue now and just share a little bit about the rest of the session that we will be in together. We are going to, well, first let me introduce our panelists. So we will hear from, first, Rachel Zwellinger. Rachel was appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom in March of 2022. She is the current Assistant General Counsel for Enforcement at Cal EPA. The California Environmental Protection Agency is an umbrella agency that includes the boards and departments, such as the Air Resources Board. We also will hear from Jamie Barinkala. Jamie is a fellow ex-colleague of mine working in Region 9. We're still colleagues. Jamie is a management champion for environmental justice for enforcement at the US EPA Region 9 office. He manages the stormwater, wetlands, and oil enforcement programs. And I think that folks will be posting into the chat some of the bio statements here so that you also have them. Luis Olmedo, as I mentioned before, is the Executive Director of Comité Cívico del Valle. Luis is a community advocate who advises on local, regional, and state environmental health programs and is a member of various state and national networks that focus on environmental policy, civic leadership, and environmental justice. We will also hear from Ms. Linda Lai. Linda is the current, was appointed by Governor Newsom in November 2020 as Cal EPA's Deputy Secretary for Law Enforcement and our General Counsel at Cal EPA. Before her appointment, she served for 2 years as a Superior Court Judge in Contra Costa County. So as you can see, we have a wonderful panel to share with you more about the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, for how to actually implement enforcement in a more community-centered way. And we will have some conversation. We also have some opportunities for interaction. We have a couple of polls that we will be asking you through the program. And then we will also have an opportunity to hear from Cynthia Babich, our amazing host, to share with us some final reflections and closing. So at this point, I think we can turn it over to our first speaker.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Deldy. Good morning. And thank you, Robina, and to the entire LA EJ Network for putting on the symposium and having us here today. I'm really delighted to be here and to have the opportunity to discuss our action plan for implementing the Memorandum of Understanding between Cal EPA and US EPA Region 9. As many of you know, in September of last year, Cal EPA and Region 9 entered into a first of its kind in the nation MOU between EPA and a state to advance equity in enforcement. The MOU is an outgrowth of the shared commitment that California and the federal governments have to equity and environmental justice. The MOU between the two of us strengthens our partnership, and it creates a framework for how our teams will approach enforcement. It affirms our shared commitment to expanding our engagement with overburdened communities and deploying our resources strategically to address their needs and increasing our joint enforcement responses and actions in these communities. So our overall goal in entering into the MOU is to undertake an enforcement that is responsive to community needs. And we cannot do that without your guidance and leadership. So today, what we're hoping to do is share a little bit more about our initial framework for implementing the MOU. It's intended to serve as a sort of roadmap for our next steps on actual concrete action. And I just want to say, we are so grateful to the many, many community partners who have given us feedback and shared your wisdom and insights along the way. All of that input has been really critical in helping us develop this roadmap. And we look forward to really continuing these conversations, including today and on into the future, as we really iterate and improve. So in terms of today's conversation, we're hoping to share a high-level overview of the action plan, followed by more in-depth discussions about a few of the initiatives we're proposing to include. And so at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Jamie from Region 9 and Rachel from Cal EPA. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Linda. So, as Linda described, the Memorandum of Understanding was really the start. And I think that was kind of showing our commitment to pursuing this path. And we've come to each of you, to communities across California to build on that. And as part of that, we want to develop an action plan on top of the MOU to really identify the specific areas that we would develop and to commit to particular steps in moving forward. And so as we're rolling that out, we really want to continue to get feedback every step of the way. And that's what brings us here. So I will turn it over to Rachel.
Hi there. It's great to be here today, and I really appreciate the Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network creating this space for us to talk about the action plan today. I think what we're hoping to do now is to provide to run through a presentation that will hopefully provide a high-level overview of how we got to where we are with the action plan and of the content of the action plan. And then to take a deeper dive into some of the specific actions that we'll highlight during the presentation. And so with that, I think it would be great to jump into the next slides of the presentation and start off with, this is just an intro slide, and then starting off with how we got to where we are today. So as Linda mentioned, in 2021, US EPA and Cal EPA entered into a memorandum of understanding focused on agency coordination to improve environmental enforcement in overburdened communities. The Memorandum of Understanding had 3 focal areas: the strategic targeting of inspections, coordination with respect to enforcement actions, and coordination and improvements in community engagement. I think what I'd emphasize about this document is that it's a really high level sort of overarching document that has a lot of really important concepts, but that needed to be made more concrete to explain and focus on what our actions on the ground will be to actualize and make real the commitments that we've made in the Memorandum of Understanding. And so after signing the MOU in 2021, we turned to this process of figuring out how to turn these concepts into on-the-ground actions. And to explain how we went about doing that, I'll hand it back to Jamie.
Great. Next slide. Yeah, so you know, the first thing we did was just go straight back to community groups, ones that we've already kind of heard from and partnered with, and held a series of meetings, including with the LA EJ Network was the first one back in last December, almost a year ago. And so about once a month, us with our senior leaders really committed to participating in these. A lot of the organizations under Cal EPA, a lot of US EPA's management participated in these listening sessions to really get input about where we wanted to go. And I'd say, I mean, just from personal experience, it really formed a different opinion about what I would think of as an action plan, or what we've conventionally thought of as an action plan. Things like, oh, we're going to do X number of inspections, we're going to focus in this area. That wasn't what we were hearing about from communities. You know, you're not looking for us to commit to a certain number of inspections. You're looking for us to commit to solving issues. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I really felt that to be an enlightening process for the meetings I was able to participate in, and I think that really did form our thinking. And so for the 6 months since our last meeting, we absorbed that, we discussed what we heard, and we created this action plan. Slide. So we really wanted to kind of emphasize to thank everybody who has participated in meetings in the past, last December. Thank you for your continued engagement, for future engagement, and for participating today. I mean, this is really, I know that you guys are spending your time either professionally or personally to help influence us. And, you know, it's really a dual effort, and you guys have made it what it is, and will continue to help shape that. And I know that's takes a lot of effort on your part. And we really want to meet you in the middle in trying to put our time as well into this. So we really want to kind of emphasize that dual effort and appreciation for all the work that you guys have done in helping to develop this plan, even if you know, you didn't realize it. Go ahead. So to summarize kind of the what we heard, and I kind of alluded to it before, was I think there's a lot of, you know, the seeming bureaucrat, people coming in with their programs, coming in saying, you know, I represent X agency for X program, you know, I want to help you. You say, you know, you describe your problem, and then you know, they might say, well, unfortunately, my tool set, my position can't help. And I think a lot of the times, trying to be helpful, we might redirect you and say, you know, maybe this agency or maybe this person can help. And then, you know, you might go to the next person and then restart that process and then be directed again. And sometimes, I mean, shocking, you know, surprisingly, this happens more frequently than we'd like to think. You get redirected back to the first person. You know, there's a lot of passing around, because, you know, there's not one necessarily a statute that can solve all of the problems. And so that passing the buck, the program constraints, it is really frustrating when you're just seeing a problem. It's a problem. It's something that you guys know is a problem. It's something that we as regulators acknowledge it's a problem, even if, you know, in our particular position, we might not be in a position to solve it. And so we really want to kind of work on minimizing that, work on taking the burden off of community members to have to, put all of the pieces together when we as regulators are the ones who know our own programs and should be able to speak with a unified and coordinated voice. So some of the things we do want to do more and that we kind of developed the action plan around focusing on are addressing your greatest needs, addressing the needs that we hear through these forums or through conversations with communities, ones that we as humans understand are real threats to the community. And figuring out, holistically, what are the right tools that we can bring to bear, of the ones we have. Obviously we do have constraints. We can't go marching around and recreate the rules, but there are flexibilities and there are areas that we can put together to try and do our best and really exercise every authority we have. I think the other kind of commonality is communication, transparency, making sure that there's feedback, making sure that, as we're progressing, Deldy talked about it at the top, that there are limitations about what we can share through an enforcement negotiation, but there are also a lot of opportunities to provide updates and status and share what we're doing, how we're doing it, and then, circle back to you all to get additional influence, to get additional feedback into our own process to make sure we're on the right track. And the last concept is sustained commitment, not flying in and out. That's something we're really focusing on. We can't be everywhere at once, unfortunately, but in the areas that we're really starting and committing to and piloting through this effort, trying to make a difference as we're over time, rather than coming in, doing whatever action or inspection and then not seeing again from us and having to start again. So the idea of sustained commitment is really embedded into the action plan. So I will hand it back to Rachel.
And so if we can move to the next slide, that takes us to where we are now and what we want to talk about today, which is our 2023 action plan. And, this was an effort to take the feedback that Jamie just described and turn it into responsive actions to address the feedback that we were hearing. The action plan is organized around sort of 4 buckets or categories of actions. Those are enhanced sustained community engagement, a rapid response task force, a coordination toolbox, and locally focused enforcement approaches. Within each of these categories, we're focusing on deploying a bunch of what we're calling pilot projects for 2023. I think we're framing our concrete actions around pilot projects for a couple of reasons. First, it's just, I think a frank recognition of not being able to do each of these things everywhere all the time. And so there are sort of an acknowledgement that we need to start somewhere. And so we're jumping in with some pilot projects. And then also, I think a notion of experimentation, that some of these things are new efforts and undertakings that we want to pilot and try and then receive feedback on and lean into and keep doing the things that are working well and modify or step away from the things that aren't working for the communities that we're trying to serve. So I think now we want to jump in and talk about each of these different categories in turn, with an understanding that several of them we're going to have a more in-depth discussion. So we'll just give sort of a very cursory overview at first. So for the next slide, the first category of activity is the enhanced sustained community engagement. And this is an effort to focus on improved engagement and cross-agency coordination with existing community-led forums in overburdened communities that focus on environmental violations. These might be IVEN networks, which stands for Identifying Violations Affecting Neighborhoods, or other similar community enforcement forums. This is a part of our plan that I'm particularly excited about, and I'm really looking forward to our deeper dive conversation that we'll jump into as soon as we sort of finish up with this overview. So with that, I'll hand it back to Jamie to talk about the Rapid Response Task Force.
Yeah, so this is another area we will be diving further into, but just as a preview, this is a little bit of an acknowledgement that enforcement isn't always the same. And, we have a standard way of dealing with things which is methodical, calculated, really trying to negotiate and do a thorough investigation before, taking action, which is, part of what a lot of cases take, especially with longstanding issues, and really trying to fix them. But what it's not always conducive to is this dynamic, rapid response to something that's urgent. And, our function, we'll talk a little bit more about this. We aren't emergency responders in the kind of enforcement arena. So we do have an emergency response, but they're, function that is separate. But there are things that don't necessarily fall into emergency response, but are something that requires quick resolution. And an example of this was something that was pretty topical. We did do our meeting almost a year ago here, which was there's the Dominguez Channel odor issue that I think really impacted a lot of people. And it wasn't necessarily the point, it wasn't something where we would be sending out our oil response team, but it was something that really needed immediate and quick action on enforcement from the enforcement lens. And so trying to identify something that pops up in the next year and setting up a rapid response task force so everybody quickly understands their roles and that we have accountability and communication to the public in kind of a dynamic setting is the idea behind trying to establish this. And we don't have a pilot because we want this to be dynamic and responsive to an incident that might occur in the next year. So that's the idea there, and we'll dive into this deeper in about an hour, perhaps.
And then the next action, which will be the focus of our sort of third deep dive conversation when we get to it, will be what we're calling our coordination toolbox. And this is sort of the idea that we're working on developing some tangible documents, templates, approaches, work streams that we can use to coordinate effectively across agencies and communicate more effectively with communities with respect to our enforcement matters. Today, at the end of our conversation, we'll share a few examples of documents and tools that we've been working on preparing to give, I think, hopefully a much more tangible sense of what this looks like and what we're trying to do. And we'll particularly talk about some of the tools in the joint inspection best practices and activity log space and our efforts to experiment and pilot efforts in those areas. Another one of the coordination tools that we're focused on, we're calling partnering protocols. I thought I'd explain that briefly now because we won't get to that later in the presentation. I think this concept of partnering protocols is a recognition that although there might be a lot of interest from Cal EPA boards and departments, from different US EPA programs in a particular issue that has emerged in an overburdened community, it doesn't always make sense to have everybody in the room at the same time. That sometimes one Cal EPA board or department or US EPA program is particularly well suited to lead an engagement because of their expertise, their authority, or whatever reason it might be. And so this partnering protocol is an opportunity to have the sort of best suited, appropriate agency lead an engagement, but to prioritize that engagement for enhanced communication and coordination, and to which will hopefully enable us to quickly leverage additional resources from Cal EPA's boards and departments and from US EPA when those additional resources would be helpful for that engagement. So that's the idea with this partnering protocols framework that we're trying. And I'm looking forward when we get to later in the discussion, sharing more about the activity log and joint inspection best practices tools that we're working on developing. And so,
Yeah, and the last category we'll probably not get into as much detail today, but there are a couple paradigms which we really wanted to emphasize as a result of what we're hearing through our meetings, which is focused on enforcement. You know, a lot of what we've talked about is part of kind of the investigation and the development of enforcement action, but really kind of stating what our values and goals are and taking enforcement actions. The first one is keeping community interests in mind when deciding corrective action, which, you know, should seem readily apparent, but you know, that's getting back to really trying to be holistic in generating our solutions and not just doing the minimum or doing the most black and white way to go back into compliance with the law, but really negotiating with the facility to, you know, correct the issue, what they're doing that might be negatively impacting the community, to what extent we can, to what extent we are able to successfully negotiate that with the facility or entity. You know, wanting to emphasize that and really set that as a goal in our enforcement negotiations. And then the other concern that we've heard a lot and is about keeping resources within the community. You know, there is a bit of a false perception on US EPA. I know that we're trying to generate money for us. We get that a lot from facilities, that we're taking penalties and we're putting it into our budget. We don't see any of that money directly. You know, that just goes to the US Treasury. We don't have any incentive to try and bring that money to us. We'd much rather it, the same as you, go back to the communities. And so, you know, one option that we have are supplemental environmental projects, SEPs, which are in lieu of a portion of the penalty. A facility can put money into a project that isn't directly related to coming back into compliance, but is kind of in the same arena as the impacts that they've had in mitigating the impacts that they've had, and could benefit the community. And so we really, this is a tool that has not been around for a few years, but has been reinstated in this administration, and that we're really glad to be able to use again and to try and promote when we have entities that are willing and interested in doing so. And so, you know, just trying to keep those resources as much within a community rather than, you know, siphoning them off in penalties. Of course, penalties are important. We really do want to make sure that facilities are being penalized for negatively impacting a community, but you know, those resources are much better spent serving the folks that were impacted. So next slide. So kind of just wrapping up, that was an overview of the action plan. You know, what we're interested in here, we're just about finalizing the plan. You know, it's really an iterative process. It's something we're going to be implementing for the next year. What we really want feedback, and the purpose of the discussion today, is, you know, what direction we can take in implementing some of these. There's still, you know, kind of some of these have been starting to be, we've tried to implement. We'll be sharing some of our attempts so far, but kind of getting more input into how we can put these out, how we can move these forward, as we've already started doing things, then use for providing feedback so that we can decide, you know, what we want to do more of, what we want to do differently, different areas we can focus in as we build on this in future years. So that's really been our mindset now. Is we're really excited to have some of these commitments that we've made, and to try and you know, move forward rather than, you know, focusing on the things that we might have missed, because there's always, I would love to build on so much more that we could be doing, but really, how do we kind of build on what we've been putting together so far and make that most effective? So I don't know if we want to do an overall question answered on action plan now, or if we want to do a deep dive into each of the topics and maybe focus on each of those. What do you think, Rachel?
I think sort of jumping right into the deep dive makes sense, and then have conversations about those.
Yeah, sounds good.
So, oh no, the next slide is great. I think somebody should correct me if this is the wrong pacing, but I think we wanted to jump right into our first deep dive, which is focused on the sustained enhanced community engagement. And I thought I'd just say a couple of words about our thinking about this space before handing it over to Luis. So this is the effort that I discussed briefly, the first of those bucket of actions, sustained enhanced community engagement, which is focusing on improved engagement with existing community-led forums in overburdened communities, focusing on environmental violations. I think there are a number of reasons why I'm really excited to be focusing on these forums. I think first, it's a really great opportunity to make sure that our enforcement efforts are capturing the problems that are most pressing for communities, that these are community-led forums that are highlighting the issues that are affecting residents. I also think it's a really helpful opportunity to have additional eyes and ears on the ground, that our boards and departments and all of US EPA's programs are doing a ton of great enforcement work across the landscape, but can't be everywhere all the time. And so having a presence in communities and working with community members to hear what's affecting people, I think is a really helpful opportunity. And then I hope and expect that it will also be a really nice opportunity and mechanism for the agencies to feed information back into communities and provide more transparency about our enforcement efforts so that people are kept abreast of where things stand in our efforts to address issues that are affecting communities. So what are we planning to do differently in these spaces? US EPA and Cal EPA are each planning to designate a staff lead in our pilot forums that are able to work across media. So working across air, water, toxics, and to work across levels of government to seek solutions to problems that are most pressing for communities. There will be one staff lead from Cal EPA and a staff lead from US EPA enforcement who will be focused on seeking to solve problems and working behind the scenes within the agencies to work across silos to bring solutions to bear. I think having a dedicated point of contact in these forums will hopefully help us to solve several problems. One of them is a problem that Jamie highlighted earlier, this idea of passing the buck, which I think is something that is unfortunately common when we see community concerns, that things bounce from agency to agency to agency. And it's not happening because people don't want to solve these problems. Everybody is very interested in coming to the table with solutions, but there are silos in the way that we do our work on the agency side that can make it difficult, that each agency has sort of a narrow and limited suite of authorities and expertise, and community concerns very often don't fit into those narrow abilities and categories within which people work. And people aren't able to easily work outside of their jurisdictional boundaries. And so staffing these forums in the way that we're hoping to do should help, because the individuals who will be empowered to work in these spaces will be working with sort of a whole of government approach, and will do the work behind the scenes of coordinating across programs, across board and departments, and across levels of government to bring solutions. Additional benefits that I think we're hoping to see, making sure we're addressing the needs of communities, the things that are most concerning to the people we're trying to serve, enhancing transparency and communication about our enforcement efforts, and allowing an opportunity for sustained relationship building, both between US EPA and Cal EPA and its board and departments, with our local regulatory partners who are so important to achieving successes in these spaces, and with community members who we are hoping to serve. We're going to start with 5 pilot communities for this effort. I think we selected these communities because they're existing forums where we already have some level of engagement. And I think there's a hope that we can jump into these forums and really hit the ground running, with the hope that if this is successful and if this is working well, that we can expand and grow these efforts in the future. So with that intro to sort of the idea of what we're trying to do, I wanted to hand the conversation over to Luis Olmedo, who was instrumental in establishing the IVAN networks and who has a wealth of knowledge about why they were formed, how they work, what's been successful, what have been some of the challenges over time. And I would really like to make sure that our efforts in this space are informed by the history and these past successes and challenges. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Louise.
Okay, so good morning. It's, be honest, it's hard to follow Jamie and Rachel, given that historically we've tried to convince government to take on these initiatives and to welcome these environmental justice models that have been developed over the years and have worked. And so it is a new way, I suppose, of thinking as environmental justice, and try to, I guess, shift our way of thinking that because of the history of neglect, that now we're living at a moment in time where there's a lot greater opportunity to solve these problems, a lot more investment resources. So anyhow, Jamie and Rachel, because I hadn't seen your presentation, I'm enthusiastic of how much government has really embraced community models under your leadership, under the leadership of our governor, the new administrators, historical changes. And I know too many to name, but two of them, of course, Administrator Martha Guzman in our region, as well as our Cali EPA Secretary Yana Garcia, and of course, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't do anything but build the most extraordinary team within the governmental agencies, but a lot of repair work that we need to do. If you can just move on to the next slide, please. So I'll just, given that so much was already given by Jamie and Rachel, I'll fill in a little bit of the history of how we got here. And so IVAN stands for Identifying Violations Affecting Neighborhoods. And I want to thank Martha on the chat that mentioned they keep make sure you clarify the acronyms, because government has so many acronyms and sometimes easy to forget how many in the community just don't understand what really all these acronyms mean. We can go to the next slide. So a little bit of the history. Imperial is similar to many environmental justice communities across the entire nation, across the entire state of California, that have an abundance of environmental issues that have gone unresolved. And some of those aren't even recognized still today as environmental issues, reported and in the process of review, evaluation, investigation, mitigation, or resolution. We still have a lot of issues there that have lingered from or carried over, right? Just decade after decade. And so I actually ended up in Maywood back in 2007. And I ended up meeting at that time was the Director of Enforcement and Emergency Response of DTSC. And the reason we connected, because it turns out that he was the only environmental prosecutor ever to have been hired and to live within the local district attorney's office. So still today, we don't have an environmental prosecutor since that time. And one of the first assignments after meeting him and his interest in making sure that Imperial got some attention was that I ended up getting connected with Ryan Atencio, and I saw him here in the conference, and he was working with the CUPA, another acronym, the Certified Unified Program Agency, when even when you say it, you don't understand what it really means. But apparently it's a delegated duty through a bill at one point in time that was given to all counties to regulate, to inspect and regulate toxics generators, and given this one authority of doing uninformed inspections or unannounced inspections. So, Ryan reaches out and we do a bus tour. And it was pretty interesting because, so, you got all the government, you got a full bus of government. They show up, we show them everything we can possibly squeeze into a one-day agenda. And then we come to the end of the day and everybody's saying their goodbyes, oh, great people, right? Very polite, and they all sort of walk away and we're just like shrugging our shoulders like, okay, well, what comes next? It's like we just did a bunch of window shopping and nobody's taking ownership of nothing. So come around the next year, it actually was Ryan that was doing some research study at the university he was going to at the time. It actually happened to be across the border in Mexico, and he was plotting contaminated rivers and where there was illegal dumping. And he was utilizing Google Earth to plot all these different illegal dumping sites. So here comes 2008, and we have a second bus tour. And by that time, we had already kind of crafted a model, right? Because we wanted to make sure that the end result of that resulted in some commitment and some buy-in of responsibility, and that it resulted in action. One of the things that we heard at the time as well was that there was a lot of different departments showing up and saying, well, there's nothing for me. So we really try to address all these shortfalls that we had in the original one. And then we try to build in other mechanics to make sure that at the end of the day, it did have some actionable items. So we ended up identifying between 3 and 5 issues that we knew needed immediate action and were actionable. We also started plotting in our bus tour on Google Earth at the time, the picture and a little description of the areas that we were concerned of. And we noticed that once it got documented, then we ended up having government, and I imagine, saying, okay, now it's written somewhere. Now it lives in a public space. I guess now we have to do something about it. And that sort of became sort of the first initial launching of this model we call Ivan. From there, we graduated to, if some of you remember back when there was the Louisiana oil spill, there was a crowdsourcing database that was created by a large global community of programmers. There was a bucket brigade at the time that utilized this platform. So we ended up adopting that. Again, this was a very long time ago. And we ended up utilizing that piece of technology now to plot the different issues and be able to launch a public reporting site. So a couple of critical things happened along the way. When we did the bus tour, had this database, then we come back to a room, of everybody who participated. And it was very interesting how sort of the human element of going around the room and asking for commitments. And I would say that 98% of the people were ready and says, yeah, count on me. I'm the right person, and I commit to myself, whether I'm government, whether I'm community, whether I'm elected official, we commit to being part of this task force. And that's how we gave sort of the first launching of the first task force. It was by consensus and by commitment. And a couple of them were said, I got to go back to my boss, but that didn't hold us from pulling together the first task force. And then, again, it started becoming sort of part of this building blocks of creating a new task force. And at that time, I think it became very clear to a lot of the government agencies government agents who were sort of used to convening in a government-only spaces, that they really didn't have access to insights and information of what was going on 24/7 around the neighborhoods, around the communities. So we started getting a lot of buy-in from government that really loved this. And then, as all of you remember, between 2007 and 2010, it just, the whole housing situation and kept ballooning until that blew up. And then, one of the first things that were divested from was environmental protection. Everything was about pushing projects, fast tracking projects. Let's get the economy going. Let's get jobs going. Don't worry about environmental protection. So that's where we realized that Ivan became instrumental as well, because even people in DC, people in Sacramento, people in regional offices, even if they were 300 miles away, they would have, as Rachel mentioned, eyes and ears on the ground to be able to continue to do their work, even if they couldn't travel, even if their work was limited, even if the resources were cut. We were still able to maintain this task force with zero resources at the time, and with the inability of government to be able to travel to respond to our issues. And so, that was actually sort of the first pilot to then, dealing with the COVID crisis where everything went Zoom. We actually had a sort of a run at it with the economic crisis, but we also had to rely on technology and rely on virtual communication to be able to still continue to resolve problems. And as you can see here, that model continued to sort of be packaged and documented. At one point, we had the UC Davis put together, sort of capture the whole model and put a report together. And so, that helped us at least be able to sort of replicate it. Throughout this entire journey, we had Tracking California. Some of you may know them. They're definitely an agency that has helped us, again, document, that helped us, capture a lot of this information and begin to stack it with other technologies. I must say that the first time that we worked on doing air monitoring was the Environmental Health Coalition that many of you may know that actually helped us out. Take a P-track, go out and count trucks and axles and emissions, weather directions, temperature and humidity, all these things. And Fast Track today, if you go to the next slide, you can see that now we have I would say, the largest network of low-cost sensor technologies that follow a very stringent, rigorous scientific methodologies that were created thanks to a National Institute of Health grant, research grant that also, again, worked with Tracking California, as you see the partnerships here, and the School of Public Health and the University of Washington. And it helped us design these monitors that, well, there's a lot of information here, but ultimately, many of you may not know, but this journey led us into coming across other challenges. And the challenges were that community science was never respected by government. And it took us a while to understand it, but the terminology of institutionalizing these models, institutionalizing the crowdsourcing database, institutionalizing community monitoring is a language that government understands. And so one of the ways that we then began to institutionalize, and coincidentally, Ryan, again, we're working together, researching. And so we came across a bill that the federal government had tried to pass at one time. It was called the Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Bill of, I think it was, I forget what year it was, but it was a bill that was unsuccessful immediately, but we were able to borrow that and create AB 1187. So a lot of people might not realize, but AB 1187 was, in 2017, was the bill that then became 617. And so finally, we were able to institutionalize community monitoring so government can no longer ignore this data. Now, why is that important, to be able to layer all these technologies? Because one thing that we have found as people are reporting into the database concerns that they find in the community. Well, with having this data, we're also able to track, whether there's a correlation of some of the exceedances that are happening within our own sensors and be able to track that. So, there's no lack of technologies. Sometimes there's lack of vision and creativity to be able to bring more data into the conversation. But most importantly, I think a lot of times it's just the fear of working outside of the box, right? All of this, again, born as a result of the IVAN. We would not have had the opportunity to learn about government, learn about regulation, learn about the different roles, and even go as far as going with government And at that time, we would go out with the Office of Criminal Investigations, with actually gun carrying officers, peace officers within that agency that actually should exist in every BDO, which means boards, departments, and offices. But it doesn't, right? The reality is that DTSC has them. They have the authority to go out and do unannounced inspections. And sometimes, and quite frankly, that's the only time you're going to catch, bad actors, or sometimes you catch people who didn't really deliberately want to do bad, but they don't really understand the laws. And a lot of businesses, quite frankly, are also victims of the lack of information. So sometimes information might leave DC, Washington, or might leave Sacramento, or might leave regional offices 300 miles away. And they don't quite reach our business sectors, don't quite reach our local government, don't quite, reach our hard to reach populations. So again, I think the whole purpose behind doing what we do is not to do government's work. In fact, at one point, we were accused of being what do you call it? I forgot the term. But anyhow, that we were meddling into government work. Vigilantes, that's the word. Which was disheartening to hear that from another government person. We're actually trying to contribute and help inform in no different way than a police officer or an investigator would go out and seek information from the public. Well, we're trying to contribute as well, things that the government not always see. Yeah. So you can go to the next slide. So here, you probably see a similar picture of what happens in many agricultural communities. Obviously, it doesn't capture everything. Imperial, we have the international border that too often gets ignored. And the fact that we are still, and in the foreseeable future, are going to continue to get served an inequitable implementation of the Cleaner Act because of one word, and it says our air districts all across the U.S.-Mexico border would meet compliance to the Cleaner Act, but for emissions coming from Mexico. That means the law does not protect our borders. It does not protect the people in the same way, and we have to accept that. We have to accept that the United States of America and the state of California is okay with people throughout the U.S.-Mexico border not getting the same promises and protections that the Clean Air Act offers. But anyhow, this is, we have over 70 air monitors. It all lives within the IVAN air database. Go to the next slide. And here's some of the AB 617. I know Deldy's here, certainly the foremost expert from the agency running the community protection program. But we were able to, well, you can go back. But just 14 elements. That is part of institutionalizing community monitoring. And I'll keep going forward. I think I'm running out of time. So if you just skip to the next one. And I apologize, there's a little bit of outdated slides, but we actually have 9 communities throughout California that actually have both the monitoring and the IVAN task forces that are still operating today. I would have to say that 100% of the communities that currently operate at IVAN have been able to also build a much stronger case and have been able to attract diverse sources of funding to help either alleviate some problems or help continue to create advocacy and collaboration across government, academia, and community to be able to solve problems. The next slide. This is just an example of now the new sort of thing that has come out of this. As we're transitioning to a cleaner mobility, well, now that we have the experience in doing monitoring for PM10 and PM2.5, which were the two monitors that we first worked with, now we're working with monitoring on methane. We've been able to come together as an IVAN network and actually leverage resources all across our network to be able to contribute to development, research and development. And right now we're really at the phase where we're building our first mobile monitor. And this is important because as government thinks of the traditional status quo way of like, give this money to some company, some vendor, and just get it out of our desk. Well, we're missing the opportunity to create local capacity, local STEM learning opportunities, environmental literacy opportunities, creating local jobs, creating local expertise. I mean, there's just so many things we leave at the table, including bringing economic opportunities to invest locally. Right now, we have a plan to build, at least in our first leg of it, 40 electric vehicle charging stations. And we're planning returning those dollars, because we're a nonprofit, into asthma programs and other environmental mitigation type of projects. So that is how you return a benefit back to a community. One example of those. So next slide. And that's it. I'm eager to hear questions and comments. Thank you.
Luis, thank you. It was so wonderful to hear the community perspective as represented by your organization and the groundbreaking work that really you and your organization and your team did. I feel like you felt like you were a little bit rushed for time. So towards the end there, I know we went a little quick, but I just want to remind everyone that, you know, the spread of the Ivan model really came about also as a result, Luis, of your leadership and your willingness to mentor and bring other organizations online, right? And so helping them understand how an Ivan tool could be very helpful in their own communities. So I just wanted to make sure to make that point. And that now, folks, we're really at a place for group discussion. You have heard so much has been shared from all of our panelists. We heard from government folks and now Luis. So now's our chance to put it all together, have some reactions, have some comments, some questions. We're going to take them in the order that we see your hand raised. So if you have a comment you'd like to make, please go ahead and raise your hand so we know that who's in the queue. And John Bentis, I see you up. And also, folks, feel free to use the chat to post your question too. Go ahead, John.
Thank you so much, Deldy. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I just wanted to make a couple of suggestions after having been involved in environmental enforcement for over 30 years. And I so clearly remember the bus tours that Gail Filter organized. Luis, I remember coming down to Brawley and attending your symposium in June 2019 over Pure Grow. A tragedy that began in 2006 from an imminent and substantial endangerment order issued by DTSC at the time. And here we are 16 years ago, and the condition of the site is still the same. It's been covered, yes, but I don't understand why things take so long to deal with in these kinds of situations. It's a situation where you could easily go ahead and do an adjunctive relief action and talk with Chevron. And that leads me to my really big point with the action plan, which I am very impressed with. And I like the idea that we have this kind of MOU. One suggestion that might be beneficial to you, and the biggest argument I ever heard in the 30 years I've been doing this, is you're chasing businesses out of California. You're enacting all these draconian laws. My reaction to those comments are the same. I know you don't like the law, but if you don't like it, then change it. But until it's changed, it's my obligation as a prosecutor to enforce it. Given that situation, you might want to include in your enforcement plan a model for mediation. These folks are stakeholders in the community. They've invested in the community. They probably own the property on which they are working on. They employ people within the community to do their jobs. You have to pitch this so that there's a reason for them to address the community concerns. If they feel as though that they're Frankenstein and they're being chased by all of the villagers out of town, that's not going to cut it. Enforcement in compliance is only a portion of the problem. You have to allow these folks to understand why they are a problem to the community and give them an opportunity to cure the defect and make them a part of the solution. Something you all ought to think about. I'll leave you with my second thought, which is quicker, and you're probably not going to like it. The time has come for peace officers. We can't do this in silos anymore, folks. We have limited resources. We really can't get the job done. The peace officer is the glue between what happened in the field and what we have to recreate in the courtroom. You're losing your prosecutors. Your prosecutors are so focused on statewide cases, which in my humble opinion, they're part of the enforcement process. But all that happens there is you pass those settlements on to the consumer. How is that impacting the quality of our lives environmentally? You need cops, folks. Cops are the one way you can navigate through these silos and speak with one voice when it comes to enforcement. That being said, thanks so much for allowing me to present those thoughts. Appreciate all the work you're doing, and we have a real opportunity here to move forward, but we have to do it together and we have to do it with one voice. Thank you.
John, thank you for your comments. Just for our record, can you quickly say your organization?
Sure. California District Attorneys Association, Environmental Project Director, retired, and former prosecutor for the city of Long Beach, and also by designation for the LADA's office.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's go now to Ken. And Ken, if you could also just say the organization or community that you are part of.
Thank you very much. Ken Sutu from Citizen Air Monitoring Network in Vallejo, California. I have two comments. The first one is, first of all, I'm so happy to be in this meeting and hear all this the memorandum of understanding, and this is exactly what the community wanted, the direction we wanted to go into. I think there are two things. One is, I think some of the things I heard here is, okay, I think US EPA or Cal EPA needs to make it clear to the community what kind of service you provide, because I think whatever you're doing here is very valuable. However, from myself, on a community member, for example, most of the time I'm working with the local air district. For example, like some of the project which Luis is working on is also on the air quality. So for me, I didn't even think about like, okay, EPA is a resource which I can reach out to. So for example, the level which I'm reaching out is just the air district and the CARB. So I think, and so also from my, I mean, it's not clear to me, for example, if I'm looking at the air quality problem, I have air district to work with, and I have CARB to work with, and I have DTSC to work with, and I have CAR EPA to work with. So who, as I think Rachel pointed out, or Jimmy pointed out, like there's so many silo, and for a community, we don't even know like who should we talk to. So for example, for me, I just work with the air district. So that's the first thing. I think we need to make it clear, like who is doing what. Okay, so there's no overlap, and also people can address the right agency with the right kind of question. That's my first thing. And then my second thing is about community level monitoring. Okay, I think from enforcement, a lot of the action based on the detection and inspection. For example, when I look at in the Bay Area, when a community member complains something to the air district, and air district send out the inspector to the complaint, the people who made the complaint, and in my community, for example, probably over 90% of the complaint end up with unconfirmed status, which means when the inspector come to the person who is reporting the complaint and the situation is not there anymore. Okay, so I think that is some area which we need to, and the way I see is because the community level, it doesn't have the capability to monitoring or to collect data on the situation. So when the inspector come over here, if the situation is not there anymore, then basically it's unconfirmed case, and the whole thing is a waste. So the district or you send out the inspector to the community, but then it didn't do anything. Okay, because the whatever reported situation is not there anymore. So I think that the basis is the community has to have the capability to monitor, just like Luis said. Okay, the money, because I see this case, which is we spend millions of dollars to consulting company and whoever, okay, and they can do some fancy thing for a short period of time, but then once that is over, that is over. We need to put the money in the community to build the capacity for the community itself to be able to do the work. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. Great food for thought for all of these questions. We are going to make sure to go back to our panelists so that we can get some responses in. I want to quickly go to a chat question, if that's okay, Cynthia, that came in earlier from Martha Sanchez to Luis, and then we'll come to Cynthia, and then we'll go to Perry. So Martha, your question in the chat was for Luis, and it asked, how do you finance the IBAN networks?
Yeah, no, great question. So the IBAN network has, in its early years, is mostly just volunteer work. It's government coming together and community, very few individuals. One thing I forgot to mention is the model that Renee had, Renee, I keep calling Renee, Rachel had shared about putting in place problem solvers. That's the model that we originally identified. Wasn't like we wrote it on paper. It's actually a real living person, and that was Ryan Atencio, who right now works at the Environmental Justice Division of the California Air Resources Board. He was the model. So then we wanted to, like, where do we get more Ryans, right? And now I'm so, glad that, Rachel and her team are now putting this on paper and identifying how many other Ryans can we find and make sure that we have these problem solvers in every community. But having said that, I forgot to also mention that AB 1187, the Supplemental Environmental Projects, was also born out of the IBAN effort, because we didn't realize, at that time, but as we started talking more to government, we started learning about, there's violations. Well, where's the money going? Well, every single board, department, and office had their own way of distributing these dollars. And those dollars weren't always coming back to heal or to mitigate or even just invest back in those communities where the violations were happening. And where are these violations happening? Well, predominantly in environmental justice communities. And so we were able to fix that through a legislative bill that now requires at least 50% of those dollars. So, many communities have been able to take advantage of these dollars, as well as academia that's been able to bring in opportunities to bring in, to utilize the data collected through the IBAN, whether it's the complaint system, the air monitoring. So there's many different ways, including philanthropy, who has been helping a lot of the communities not only launch the IBANs, but also maintain them. And look, not every time is there an interest or an administration like we see right now really caring about IBAN. I mean, some would have liked to dig a big hole and bury it and never see it again. I mean, that's the reality we live with politically. But, so sometimes we've had to, IBAN has survived without any resources at all. And it's still here, and it continues to be with resources or without resources. It is the will of the people. It is the investment of the community, and it is the interest and investment of good people like yourselves who are part of these environmental justice efforts from government. So I hope that answers the question, but the end, I guess, answer is, yeah, there's a lot of creativity and diversity in ways that you can help support this system, and it's not always financially.
Thank you, Luis. That's excellent response. I will add to it just a bit that environmental justice small grants offered both by US EPA and Cal EPA have also supported the growth of IBAN networks in other parts of the state. I think that's another expression of government's commitment to support community-driven efforts focused around compliance and enforcement. So now I think we'll go to—
And that's correct, Deldy. And I'm sorry I didn't open that door, then I'd have to name everybody, but appropriately so. US EPA, Cal EPA, And I would say, quite frankly, most agencies in the state have contributed in some way or another to different communities for the IVAN network. And one thing I must say, and I'm sorry to take too much time, but I have to make clear that Comité doesn't own the task forces. These become ownership of every community. So we're really just exporting the model, and the community and the EJ partners themselves and their governmental partners own this model. Because a lot of times it's perceived as, oh, Comité owns it. No, that's never been our goal. Same like monitoring. Our goal is never to own it. It's to transfer the knowledge and the capacity and have communities own their own knowledge, their own information, and their own, but that's, just wanted to clarify that.
Great
Sorry
point.
for interrupting.
No. Great point, Luis. All right, Ms. Cynthia.
Hey, Deldy, would it be okay to address some of the previous comments before they get lost? Or do you want to do all the questions first?
Let's go ahead and get the questions out on the table, and then we can have, because we're about halfway through our group discussion. Okay. So let's just get 2 more, and I'll just ask you as panelists, just make some notes to make sure that we don't lose the things that you want to respond to. So we'll hear from Cynthia and then Perry.
So I think that talking about sustained community engagement is like really critical. And that's what you're hearing a lot. There's some of us who've been doing this for a really long time. Early on, we found amazing agency partners. I too was on that bus tour, and it was very unusual. And the fact that I remember driving by a facility that was removing, I think it turned out to be asbestos out there in the middle of nowhere. And it looked kind of shady, the operation that was going on. And I'll be darned if the bus didn't stop, the doors open, and the prosecutors marched right out that door and went right to that facility. I was literally beside myself. I could not believe it. And that is what we're still looking for. We've seen it, we've had a taste of it, and now the cycle has come back around again. And we're seeing these other amazing people like Rachel and Jamie and others who are really uplifting, hearing from the communities, trusting us, because, part of sustained engagement is relationship building, and we all bring a lot of personal capital to this space. And so I just want to thank people and remind people that, this is our 8th year of having symposiums, but it's really our 8th year of building relationships with each other and creating this foundation for the next generation to be able to come in and move forward based on lessons learned and not always having to start over from scratch. So thank you, Luis, for that amazing presentation and that awesome overview. And I too am optimistic. So thank you.
Cynthia. Perry. And don't forget to introduce.
Hi, my staff.
Okay.
I'm a staff attorney with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Definitely in support of these pilot programs and are excited about the opportunities that are going to arise from them. And I just wanted to share a brief anecdote that highlights why these pilot programs are so important and the current issues community residents are seeing on the ground. This year in the Eastern Coachella Valley, in the AB 617 community meeting, the air district mentioned there might be some air quality violations from a local biomass plant. Instead, we tried to follow up and little information was shared. It took a couple weeks for us to finally get the notice of violation that EPA sent to this biomass plant. But there was still with residents about what the health impacts from these violations are going to be. Since that NOV has been issued, it's been 5 months and residents still are in the dark about what enforcement action is going to be taken, what the health impacts are going to be from these alleged violations. And that's just plainly unacceptable. So we're excited that the pilot programs can hopefully fix that issue and there'll be more community engagement. And the last point I want to make is Cal EPA and US EPA definitely say they're going to encourage and promote the use of supplemental environmental projects, but I'm just curious to what does that mean? What does that look like? What is encouraging the use of SIPs? If a defendant doesn't want to do one, does that mean it's not going to happen? If residents and community come together and put together some great ideas for what SIPs could be, what should they do with those ideas? Should they take them to EPA? Should they take them to the polluter? And I guess I'll just leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Perry. We've got a lot on the table and a lot of issues and ideas that our folks have put out there for conversation. So I want to invite our panelists to address them. We could actually start with the most recent one. And I want to actually call out our colleague, Helena Rim, who's helping behind the scenes here. She also is responsible in the CARB Enforcement Division for overseeing the SEP program. So Helena, if you wouldn't mind, maybe helping answer that question, at least for CARB, about SEP ideas.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, awesome. Well, thank you for the question. So as Deldy mentioned, I help coordinate the SEP program at CARB. And I think your question was, how do we get proposal ideas from communities and ensure that they get funded through the SEP program? So you're right in the fact that it is a voluntary program for violators during the settlement of enforcement actions. But on our end, what we try to prioritize is reaching out to community groups in either AB 617 or other communities in California to one, understand the air quality priorities that they have, and to help them develop proposals around those priorities. So within our small team, we really do try to prioritize our sort of capacity building support around that and technical support in terms of developing proposals and making sure that they are eligible with the SEP policy and are listed to be available through the SEP program. So that's an effort that is ongoing and that we're trying to really focus on right now. I don't know if that answers the question, but is there?
Thanks, Helena. That was great. Maybe we can also drop a link in the chat to the SEP.
Oh, absolutely.
Webpage.
Sure thing.
And I think this is Linda, just following up on the SEPs issue. I think it's a great question. You know, SEPs are voluntary. What happens if the polluter doesn't want to do a SEP? What does it mean for Cal EPA and Region 9 to say we really want to, you know, place a renewed emphasis on SEPs? I think what that means is, in some senses, just encouraging, you know, for the Cal EPA family, all of our boards and departments to really prioritize this when we are engaged in settlement negotiations and enforcement actions. There are all kinds of things polluters don't want to do. They might not want to fix that violation. They might not want to implement new measures. They might not want to pay that amount of penalties, but that's the point of the enforcement action. And in the settlement, we have certain non-negotiables. We have certain things that we push for. If we can't get them, then we litigate. But that's always the give and take in a settlement negotiation. So by emphasizing the importance of SEPs, I think what we mean is really prioritizing that in our enforcement work, and making it as high a priority as any number of other things, like getting good measures in place. And so, yes, ultimately, you're absolutely right, Perry. If it's not agreed to, then it's not going to happen in that settlement. But you can still prioritize it in the same way you would other elements of what you're trying to achieve in getting a good outcome. I hope that wasn't too vague.
And I mean, I can add just one more thing on the SEPs in terms of prioritizing. A lot of it really is just convenience. SEPs are by design going to be more expensive than the penalty. That's part of a SEP. A lot of the times, I'd say, when we're dealing with entities that are sophisticated and have enough money that they could pay for it, they like the idea. But if they're approached about it too late, which is very common, they look into the amount of effort. They've already kind of close to signing on the line. They just want to write the check and be done with it. But if we can bring it up early and often, and we can help connect the dots about potential projects, they actually, they don't mind signing a slightly larger check to get that project. But you know, they don't want it to slow down their progress on concluding what, you know, getting closure on the enforcement action. So I do think there are tactics that we can use to be more proactive on encouraging SEPs, and that in my experience in in our experience negotiating, facilities generally prefer to pay for even if they're signing a bigger check, if it goes towards something positive, they'd rather do that. They just don't necessarily have the time or attention for it.
Thanks for those responses. I will also say, just for Eastern Coachella Valley, you're right, Perry, that community, the Community Steering Committee, did identify as one of a number of priorities in their emissions reductions plan, concerns about the Greenleaf Desert View Power Plant. That facility is located in Indian country, which means US EPA has direct implementation responsibility for Clean Air Act violations or compliance. But we are with the Air District working with US EPA Region 9 so that we can share information that is shareable at the times that we're able to share it based on EPA's formal enforcement process with the community at large, and certainly with the Community Steering Committee. We also have a community liaison, Andrea Juarez, who works in our community air protection office, and she can also be a point of contact for you in helping make sure we're getting all the information that's available to share at the time with you and the rest of the CSC. Yeah, Luis.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that on the topic of Ivan. When we launched the Coachella Task Force, there were 3 major concerns that were in the Coachella that were very visible, and the sensors were lighting up for people. And that was the Cabazon Recycling Park, in which the COMAC, the Desert View now, and formerly known as something else, I know they keep changing names, Western Environmental was another location that was also started hitting our database. And Western Environmental ended up being a dumping site, and I would say an illegal dumping site to California standards, because they were receiving state hazardous waste. And the problem with that facility, or that whole entire park, is that it's in Cabazon tribal land, which is, tribal nation land. And therefore, it's like being in Mexico, right? Like California, even though in their watch are allowing for these bad actors to go and dispose and dump and operate in federal land, it's like they're going to work and operate in Mexico. Then California says, I no longer have authority. It's the federal government. And then the federal government comes back and says, we regulate federal waste or federal laws, that's state law. So then they end up falling into this unprotected space where there's no laws, sort of no man's land. And those are critical problems that need to get solved, because we can't just be cleaning up the mess with taxpayer dollars over and over and over. These are loopholes in the law that still today exist. And therefore, these communities will continue to suffer the consequences. As a result, and I would say one of the milestones that were achieved was for the first, it prompted the first cooperative agreement between the South Coast Air Quality Management District and the tribe to enforce and regulate, as long as that agreement is in place, but either party can undo it. So it's not set in law in stone, it is an agreement between the two parties. So are there still gaps in the law and our community still unprotected? Absolutely, yes, today. Coachella is still unprotected. And so, let's see, Perry, glad to have a long conversation with you about this anytime.
Thanks, Luis. I want to make sure to invite and make space for the other panelists as well to respond to anything that you've heard so far.
I just had a couple of responsive thoughts to some of the comments. To Perry's comment about an enforcement matter that sort of, or what I'm hearing, it sounds like things just went silent for 5 months. And I think that's a space where we're trying to do better. And with this sustained enhanced community engagement models that we're trying to increase communication throughout the enforcement process. And there are times when things need to be confidential for to make sure the enforcement matter can proceed. But there's a lot that can be shared throughout the enforcement process. And we're trying to do better in these forums with increasing communication along the way and empowering staff at our boards and departments to talk more to communities. So that's really, I think it's an important gap that you've identified, and it's a space that we're really hoping to do better. To Ken's comment about sort of needing a better understanding of who does what with respect to each issue, I'll say that I've been in this position now for about 7 months, and I still have trouble figuring it out all the time. That the sort of morass and complexity across the state, federal, local level within, across all of these different subject areas, air, water, pesticides, toxics, it's hard to figure out. And so I think part of what we're trying to do is to use different models that make it easier for members of the community to find the right entity, whether it is coming to an IVEN network or other enforcement forum and having a single point of contact, who then that person's job is to connect the right pieces at the federal, state, and local level, so that the burden of doing that isn't on the community members to try to sort that out. I think we also try to do that. We're going to talk a little bit later today about our complaint system. That's another way that we're trying to do that, to sort of enable community members to send information and have on the agency side us sort out who the right entity to be responsive is. But I think it's a space that, there's a lot of opportunity for continued thought about how to do better about communicating what the suite of relevant regulatory agencies that can be a productive part of a conversation look like. And then just a final thought on John's point about the idea of mediation as a part of these conversations. I think that's really interesting, and don't know exactly what that would look like tangibly, but would love to sort of continue the conversation and think about that.
I just want to jump onto that because I was also thinking about the mediation concept, and I think it really is case specific. Sometimes I think that's the better resolution, right? You want to get the community and facilities to be able to kind of resolve a relationship so that you guys can be in a position to better, address your problems going forward. You're not always relying on a third party like the federal or state or even local governments to come in and intervene. I think conversely, sometimes it's not possible. And, our incentive is really get a result. And sometimes us being kind of that third party is helpful in that negotiation of being kind of the middleman, and to get the result and be able to hear from you guys and then kind of synthesize that and then get the facility to sometimes open up to us in ways that they might not necessarily, in front of a large group of people. So I think that's a really good point though, how our role is there. And it's definitely when I think about, I know that we've used several tactics where we have organized meetings with facilities and community members and done it separately. And it's one that we've thought about what is the right situation, what to do in that situation. And generally I'd say it's more the latter where we're meeting separately, but maybe we should consider more doing, those joint discussions. Sorry, I think Luis's hand was up. I just want to jump on that point from Rachel.
Luis.
Maybe your hand's back down.
Yeah, I apologize from earlier today.
Oh, okay.
I do think that we had another comment or question in the chat. I'm going to ask Stephanie Lewis, who posed it to me, if you could help the group understand what the question was.
Sure. Thank you, Deldy. I had someone ask about, Luis, in your presentation, they're seeking information about the EV mobile monitoring program that monitors methane. Can you speak to that further, please? Thank you, Luis.
Yeah, so be quite honest, I have an extraordinary team here at CCV that can speak to the technical aspects of it. And I don't have that team with me unless they showed up here in the room, but we're not the only ones. You know, it's a partnership of several environmental justice organizations across the state of California. Some of this funding to help support the development and research and development of these low-cost sensor technologies to measure methane have also come from the California Air Resources Board air grants and other resources that we've been able to leverage. One of our partners that has been with us since the beginning and still today is Tracking California, and they've been able to bring in other experts that have been able to help us, you know, in terms of the monitoring expertise, being able to get collect the data, but also being able to develop a sort of a health metric or a health interpretation of what that data. There's very little information out there as to how it impacts health, but some of the things that we're really looking at in terms of collecting this data is also the toxics and criteria. So methane can be a proxy, an indicator of toxics and criteria contaminants being present. Again, our goal with this data is to help identify or even get early detection of things that may be happening in our surroundings. Again, from PM10, PM2.5, methane, VOCs, and others. There's not enough regulatory monitors to establish throughout the state of California or the US, quite frankly. And so having this additional data, it helps us inform. As well, you know, a lot of the conversation right now around methane is also on help collect data to help try to determine whether there's leaking wells or whether there's sources of methane and how that's impacting the planet. So we're looking at it from both, how it's causing a planet impact as well, and even more importantly, how is it impacting humans on the ground. Now, there's been a lot of investment, as you've seen in the state legislature budget negotiations. I think there was $100 million for methane satellites, another $30 million for methane mobile monitoring. And that goes back into the importance of bringing communities the tools and resources. And look, you know, let me remove the veil from everyone, right, that doesn't know this. But monitoring isn't rocket science, right? And it makes me wonder if rocket science is even out of our reach as communities, you know, getting involved in sort of this the community monitoring. So we're not trying to take government's job. We're actually trying to help contribute data in a more affordable way, so that if there is a need and an opportunity to bring in or make a case that we need more expensive type of equipment, then we can, you know, hopefully help inform government as to where to best place these sensors. So yeah, anybody who's interested in sort of getting all geeky, I have, you know, colleagues here in our office who are monitoring experts, and they said it themselves. I'm not saying that they get geeky. They say we love getting geeky with all this talk about science and monitoring, and they love this stuff. So happy to connect anyone here in this conference to my partners to talk about, to, you know, get in the weeds about the technology itself and, you know, bring in partners. Just remember, our role and our goal is to make this public accessible. We're not trying to put paywalls in front of it. We're not trying to privatize it. We're not trying to own it. You're paying for it. Government's paying for it. Philanthropy's paying for it. You know, the good hearts of our partners in environmental justice are paying for it with their own, human, their own investment of time. So whatever we do is free, and it should be free. You know, public health and information should not be put in front of a paywall. And I hope that message is one that everybody takes with you, especially those of you who can have influence in how funding gets invested and what type of expectations we should have for that to help improve the quality of lives of everyone, rich, wealthy, whatever, doesn't matter. Everybody deserves good health, and most importantly, addressing the environmental justice issues that have lingered for far too long in our communities. So I'm hoping that's a good answer.
A great answer.
Thank you so much, Luis. That was excellent. I really appreciate that. I'll be in touch.
Thank you, Edwin. And to help with that being in touch, please look at the chat from Cynthia. If you're a panelist, please put your contact information in the chat so that folks can reach out to you. I want to quickly go to Linda, and then we're going to segue to our break.
Hi, thank you, everyone. I just wanted to add a little footnote to what Luis was sharing, all the information on methane issues. You had a wonderful description of a bunch of things in the governor's budget this past year. In addition, in July of this year, the governor charged a few of our state agencies with the creation of a methane task force. And so CARB, CalGEM, Cal EPA, and the California Natural Resources Association are participating, sorry for the alphabet soup, in a methane task force and really looking at different aspects, both, long-term on the satellites piece. CalGEM is looking at a number of things with SB 1137 with the setbacks legislation. It's also got rolling out a proposed policy for abandoning idle and orphan wells and how to prioritize addressing those. In addition, there will be an enforcement piece to this, and we're really excited to be continuing sort of cross-agency collaboration on methane, around methane and being responsive to community concerns around methane in the oil and gas industry. And we'll be looking to, build on the really good work of a number of 617 communities where there are oil and gas commitments in the community emissions reductions plans, and to really continuing to develop and work and develop and building on an enforcement approach in this important space that is responsive to community concerns. And thank you, Deldi, for including the link in the chat to the methane task force. There's more information available on that website.
Perfect, Linda, and everyone, thank you all so much for this rich conversation. We are not done, but we're going to fortify ourselves. Please, we know that we have a 10-minute break. Please don't forget to mute yourself when you go on break. Feel free to grab a snack, take care of your bodily needs so that we can come back and continue this really excellent discussion. 10 minutes, we'll see you at 12 noon. Welcome back, everyone. Hope folks had a restful break. Sometimes we come back from break and we're not really sure, did everybody come back? So feel free to use the Zoom or turn your camera on and off. Use the Zoom reactions to give us a thumbs up if you're back. You can find Zoom reactions by, I think you can, scrolling down to bring up the Zoom toolbar, find reactions. Great, thanks so much. Looks like we have critical mass. So here we go into the next part of our conversation. Again, just a big thank you to the panelists and all of you as participants for your great, thoughtful questions. We're now going to do a conversation, more brief discussion on some of the different elements that were included in the overview that you heard from Jamie and Rachel. So I'll tee it up to, let's see, let Rachel to help us narrow in on those aspects that we want to talk about next as a group.
So I think the things we were going to talk about next, we're going to jump right to talking about some of the tools that we discussed earlier. So these are sort of the agency efforts to coordinate, to put together tangible things, whatever they may be, that will help us to better communicate and coordinate with each other and to communicate and coordinate with communities. And so we thought we would try to screen share a couple of examples of the things that we've been working on. And I think for both of these examples are efforts with respect to particular facilities. I think our intention is not to talk about these sort of ongoing enforcement matters of particular facilities, but rather to talk about the tools as sort of examples of the type of things that we're hoping to do in this space. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was this concept of an activity log. And what we have found is that there are some efforts in overburdened communities where there are a lot of agencies focused on a facility or a suite of issues, but the agencies don't always know what the others are doing across the federal, state, and local level and across different subject areas. And we don't always do a great job of communicating what all of the agencies are doing with the impacted community. And so we thought of this idea of an activity log as a way of compiling public-facing, publicly available information about enforcement processes at a particular facility to provide additional transparency about who inspected a facility, what laws they were inspecting under, what the outcomes of any enforcement cases were, to try to be more transparent and coordinated across agencies and with the public. I think part of the hope of this is that it will help to identify gaps, perhaps in oversight of a facility. It will lead to more efficient agency activity if everybody knows what has already been done and when and what remains to be done. And then it will hopefully help to make more clear to the impacted community what the enforcement process has looked like to date and what everybody's authorities are and what they're doing. And so the facility we initially tried this out is Atlas Metals down in Los Angeles in the Watts neighborhood in LA. And Jamie, I think you're able to screen share the document. So we, in coordination with Region 9 and Cal EPA, pulled together the suite of regulatory agencies who have been focused on the facility over the last several years in light of a lot of community concerns about this facility, which is sited right next to a high school and is a metal recycling facility. And so in this is sort of the example of the activity log where we provide just very brief background about the facility, and then a discussion of what the environmental requirements are that apply and who the regulatory agencies are who are involved. And these sort of cross different media areas, different levels of government with participation from the LA City Attorney's Office, LA County, South Coast Air Quality Management District, the LA Regional Water Quality Control Board, the AG's office, DTS, the Department of Toxic Substances Control, Cal EPA, and various US EPA programs. So you can see this is a space where there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen because there are a lot of different regulatory requirements for this facility. And so in addition to bringing everybody together and listing out, we have sort of the actions over time that each of these entities have taken with respect to enforcement and compliance activities. And so I won't read through all of this, but they're organized from the local level up to the state agencies and then the federal level. And the document provides an overview of timelines for inspections, issuance of notices of violation, et cetera. And, I think part of the takeaway of this is, a facility like this is complicated and has a lot of complicated issues and problems. And pulling together all of the agencies and documenting the compliance history doesn't necessarily, or the enforcement history, solve all of those problems. But it at least seems like an important first step to providing additional transparency to the public as to who has been doing what with respect to enforcement, and to all of the agencies who are at the table at the facility to enhance communication. The idea is that this is a living document and there's an intention to update it quarterly and make it publicly available, so that as there are follow-up actions, as there are additional inspections, for example, that information will be added and the document will continue to grow and change and be updated over time. I think we're still thinking about and working on how to disseminate and make available a document like this, whether it gets posted on a website, whether it gets passed out. But it's a document that I think we're all interested in seeing being accessible and available for anybody who's interested in understanding what the agencies have been doing at this facility.
Ellie, can I just add a little bit
Jump in.
to that? Thank you so much. Thanks, Rachel, for that overview. And I just wanted to say that, I think Carrie flagged earlier a totally understandable concern about sometimes there's a facility, there's lots of community concern, there's, potentially an alphabet soup of agencies involved. And, to be candid, sometimes we, this goes without saying, we often need to do a much better job about communicating what we're doing, what has been done. And to be candid, sometimes I think internally there are different views at the different regulatory agencies about what is appropriate to communicate before the complete end of an enforcement action and what is not. And I think what we're trying to do is hold out different examples of there's actually a bunch of stuff that can be communicated without compromising an ongoing investigation. Obviously, as regulatory agencies, we need to prioritize and ensure that our investigations, our enforcement actions are not compromised, but we also can communicate certain things without compromising our investigations. And one thing that we're trying to do, in some senses a baby step, but in some senses, I think an important and meaningful one, hold out concrete examples of things that we can communicate. I think it's a learning process, an opportunity for, our enforcement, for us, and sort of pushing ourselves on like what is appropriate to share at what stage. And this was kind of, an experiment, and hopefully it's a useful one, and provides a concrete example again of, there's lots of information there. We need to be doing it, but there's lots of information we can communicate without compromising our investigations. And we need to be doing a better job of compiling it so that we're talking to each other, the regulatory agencies, and critically, we're talking to affected communities.
Great points, Linda. Should we, go ahead, JD, you want to talk a little bit more about the?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to this, and as we talk about some of our other tools, a lot of it, the way we frame is about communication, and certainly this is a main goal, but what I've really experienced in some of these tools that we've been starting to pilot is it's much more than that. It has been a venue for internal communication and accountability as well. Is once we start requiring ourselves to put these things on paper, it then, commits us to things, that it makes us think about things. I reached out to the water board, my counterparts for my program, to have several conversations about this in order to put it together. And that, led to conversations about, well, what are our next actions and that sort of thing. So, this is it's only a couple pages, but it is pretty time intensive to put together, but it's not just about the document itself. It is, really about the, forcing that accountability as well, and really being comprehensive in making sure that we all have everything in one place and that nothing's being overlooked. So there have really been side benefits to that. While, you guys, that kind of being transparency is one aspect to it. It's really only a portion, because the internal transparency is something that's really important as well.
Excellent. And I would just want to draw a parallel here to something I'm seeing. We heard Luis talk about the IVAN network and the model of IVAN, which was driven by community concerns that got lodged on this complaint system that anyone could go and see. But also the other part of the model was bringing the agencies together with communities so that we're all in the same room. And even before COVID, it was fabulous to have those opportunities for regulators to actually hear from each other and help brainstorm with community. And certainly there was always a lot of after the fact, after the meeting and before the meeting, conversation between regulators so that folks would be prepared for those IVAN conversations. So that fact sheet that you shared, Jamie, you can see, obviously, as you just shared, you had to do a lot of checking in with other agency folks to make sure we got all the pieces of the story out there. So definitely seems like a valuable approach.
So why don't we go ahead and share another tool that was also sort of focused on this agency coordination, and I think is very consistent with this conversation, and then maybe open it up for discussion. Another one of the tools that we wanted to talk about is we sort of bucketed it under joint inspection best practices, which is sort of an inquiry about when there are community concerns about a facility, how do we as the agencies work better together to understand the compliance history and what issues may exist at the facility, to assess the need for and appropriateness of a joint or individual inspections, to coordinate with local enforcement partners, to proceed with any appropriate inspections, and along the way to regularly communicate with the community about our efforts. And so I wanted to share something that we worked on with respect to a facility in Torrance, California, in the LA area, which I think is a baby step towards working in this space and trying to do better at these things and coordinate. So JCI Jones Chemical is in the Torrance neighborhood. It is a high-risk facility that handles large volumes of a variety of chemicals. It's a bleach factory repackaging facility, and it's right next to a neighborhood and a lot of residences. And there have been longstanding community concerns about the facility, particularly around the safety of the facility because of its proximity to residences. Concerns about the facility were brought to the attention of the agencies, and we thought this would be a good opportunity to sort of experiment with this effort to coordinate better and communicate better. And so we pulled together the suite of regulatory agencies who regulate this facility to obtain a better picture of the regulatory landscape, who is doing what, and then what the compliance history looks like for the facility, and then share that information with the community. And so this is sort of this is a bunch of slides that we pulled together with participation from various programs at US EPA, the LA Regional Water Quality Control Board, South Coast Air Quality Management District, the Los Angeles City and County Fire Departments, which are the CUPA, as Luis described earlier, the Certified Unified Program Agency, which runs certain hazardous waste, hazardous material programs. And we engaged and pulled together all of these agencies to look into the compliance history of the facility and lay it out in sort of plain English slides that we could walk through with each other, coordinating across the agencies and with the community to get an understanding of the lay of the land with respect to the compliance history of the facility across these different media and across the levels of government of folks who are regulating at the facility. So we can just, we won't go through the substance, but we can run through these slides just very quickly to understand the different type of information that was provided. So this is US EPA providing background information about RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act hazardous waste laws that are applicable. And then we just keep moving their chemical accident prevention program, additional background on how that law works. And then looking at the inspection history for the facility and explaining when US EPA was out at the facility, what they were looking for, and what their findings were and their follow-up enforcement action through the next slides. Some photos included of some of the problems, an overview of the settlement, and then then also information about who to contact, where more information is available. And then similar sort of slides and setup from each of the participating agencies. I think in this space, it was important to allow each of the participating agencies to sort of present their own information and their overview of what their inspections have yielded over the past several years. I think we looked over a 5-year time period. So here you have more information from LA City Fire, the CUPA. And so I don't think we need to, I don't intend to be going through these in any great detail, but just wanted to provide an example of what this pulling together agencies to understand the compliance history of a facility can look like, and then to do a better job of communicating that information to members of the public who are concerned about the facility. I think from an agency perspective, it was a really productive exercise in terms of gaining clarity across all of the regulatory agencies about what the different roles are, what the compliance looks like, what gaps there might be that need to be investigated further. And I think there are a lot of conversations that are still happening in that space. I think it was also a nice opportunity to bring in some of our emergency response voices who are not directly related to the enforcement conversation, but are a really important piece of an effort to be responsive and address what's really concerning for this community, which is if there is an incident, what's the plan? Who is going to be doing what? And what does the emergency response communication, notification, et cetera, look like? I think a lot of these conversations are a work in progress. And will continue into the future, but that there were some useful connections that were made among the agencies with the community, and that it was a really nice opportunity to pull people together who are all looking at the same facility across time, but not necessarily coordinating with each other at all. I think this is a learning process. I would say our effort to do this was not the most efficient. It took a long time to pull the agencies together, to pull the slides together, to sort of frame the conversation. I hope that as we do more of this, we learn to do it more efficiently and effectively going forward. And looking forward to sort of iterating, continuing the conversation with respect to this facility, and then trying this again with respect to other facilities.
Thank you, Rachel and Jamie.
And I'll just get a little anecdote on that presentation, kind of harping back again to the point about internal communication. It's kind of I gave the portion on stormwater violations a relatively minor consideration in the scale of things of folks' interest, but I put together the presentation maybe a week before in collaboration with the state. I presented that, that these historical violations are mostly resolved. And in the middle of the presentation, from someone from the state kind of interrupted me and said, "Hey, while you were talking, I actually pulled up the record, and they just submitted this new data this morning into the database, or this week, that suggests potential new violations." And I was caught off guard, but we ended up talking about it later in the week and kind of coming up with a path forward. And I'm certain that was not a conversation we would have had if we weren't having that meeting, or having this particular attention on this facility. So again, it's just a real opportunity for us to get organized and focus in on areas that you guys are focused in on, and that communication is really part of that, as an excuse for us to make sure that we to hold us accountable and get us up to speed.
Great anecdote. So we've heard a little bit about a couple of different tools. Should we go ahead and open it up to just see what reactions folks have, comments or questions? I see Swati Sharma.
Hi, thank you. My name is Swati Sharma. I'm the EO for the Board of Environmental Safety with DTSC. Thank you for sharing these tools. We were just talking about this with the board yesterday about how something like these tools, as there's various state agencies and local agencies and what's being done on many of these sites, it would be useful to have something like this. And so I'm so happy to see this. I'm curious, I know it's a lot of coordination, it's a lot of effort to put something like this together. What's the next step? Are you still piloting this? Are you anticipating you're going to do this with more sites? I think just within regulatory agencies, something like this is so helpful, and then also for the public to know what's being done. So I'm just curious, what's the plan, or how many sites you plan to provide tools like this for? Thank you.
So I think that remains sort of a work in progress and under discussion as we're figuring this out, but sort of hearing feedback that a tool is valuable and seems like it's worth pursuing, I think is really helpful in informing our thinking about whether this is a valuable effort to roll out in other spaces. And so I think we're really still thinking about how we can scale this, both in terms of agency bandwidth and the workload to do it, and making sure that we're doing it in places where it is valuable and effective. And so, I think no clear answer, definitely a work in progress, but really helpful to hear that it's valuable and we're thinking about how we can do more of it.
And Rachel, just to, again, Louise, I just keep going back to you all the time here in this conversation. I hope you don't mind. But you know how you said, hey, we, Comité Civico, we don't own the Ivan model. It has taken off and become its own thing. I think much like that, Rachel, the more that we can be transparent about the tools that are being developed, other agencies can pick them up and use them, right? So another big plug for, learning from each other.
Just in terms of timing, this was really meant to be our 2023 action plan, and we're already kind of coming up with some of these products under it here in 2022. And so we're, in some ways we're ahead of schedule, and we're happy about that. But really that goal of being, let's see what sticks, let's get that feedback, and then kind of the next phase to be figure out, how can we scale this? How can we use this in other areas and that sort of thing? So I think in the immediate term, continuing to refine that and probably update these. Some of these are really around the sustained commitment. Just because we did this one-off presentation or fact sheet, it doesn't mean we're necessarily done with this community or this facility. And so continue to refine that and work with it, and then reflect on what's worked and not as we pick our new communities.
So Jamie and Rachel, both, we have a question comment in the chat, and then I'm going to go to Florence and then Cynthia. So Susanna, thanks for your comment in the chat. Speaking of community, how did you communicate and engage with the community about this interagency action around JCI Jones?
So I think we received the complaint from the community and sort of talked about it first to better understand what the concerns were. And I think that was a conversation that took place over time and was sort of an important learning opportunity for us to attempt to tailor our looking into the facility to make sure that it was responsive to what the concerns really are. So I think we didn't go into this conversation thinking that we were going to pull in and focus on a discussion about emergency response, but as we better understood the nature of the community concerns, sort of our efforts changed in that respect. I think there was then sort of a long period where the agencies were working sort of behind the scenes to find the right local entities to pull everybody together to gather the compliance history with some updates along the way to say, thanks for your patience. We're still, we intend to circle back and we're working on this. And then we had a big group meeting where all of the regulatory entities who contributed to those slides about the compliance history came together and sat down with members of the Delano Action Committee, including Cynthia and Florence here, to talk about, to run through the slides and have a discussion about the facility, about DAC's concerns about the facility, concerns of members of the community surrounding the facility, and to go over the compliance history, and then to understand sort of what gaps there were. I think as a part of that back and forth conversation, there were some really interesting things that emerged. For example, concerns about transportation of chemicals to and from the facility that wasn't, as it came out in conversation, within the regulatory authority of any of the agencies who are at the table. So part of that conversation illuminated some gaps in the way that we were looking at it and some spaces for follow-up to understand the fuller regulatory enforcement picture at the facility. And so that's what it looks like so far with that sort of big meeting with all of the agencies, some follow-up conversations about it afterwards, and an intention to continue to sort of follow up in some of these spaces and then circle back with the community with additional actions, thoughts, information as we're able to pull it together.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, let's go to Florence and then Cynthia.
It's nice to see you, Delby.
You too, my dear. Wonderful to see you and hear your voice.
The first thing I want to say is how tremendously helpful it was to have this interagency meeting. It meant a lot to us that people would sit down with us, that it was such a good scope of people that we could talk to. It really made a big difference, and I appreciated it. And the second thing I want to talk about is the task forces that were part of the work that DTSC was doing for many years. And when I say for many years, I mean, I went down to LA in March of 1985, and those task forces were operating and working then. And there is a federal task force, a county task force, and a city task force. We had veteran inspectors routinely going to meetings and sharing information about enforcement with other agencies, et cetera. And one thing that I was really impressed with was because the people sat down together and went over cases they were working on and helped each other on an enforcement case, there was a lot of trust building. so that people knew they could count on the other person to take action on the issue. And I think one of the things that could be done would be to attempt to see if these task forces are still meeting. And I know the one in LA City is, because I got a note back from Jessica Brown. But that kind of interaction can make a tremendous difference. And John Fentis was talking a little bit about this. So I just want to say it wouldn't hurt to interconnect with those people, see if those task forces are still vibrant and still happening, and see how that fits into the big picture. So those were the things that I wanted to talk about. Thank you, Deldy. Nice to see everyone else too, by the way. Louise and John Fentis, etc. I've enjoyed that part very much.
Brings back a lot of great memories for sure. Thank you, Florence. Cynthia.
So I just want to say that definitely we're grateful to the partnerships that we've made, to all the partners who really came together around Jones Chemical, but you know, especially to Rachel, mostly because she's the face that we saw and the person who responded and really had trust in what we were saying. And, you know, Florence spent a considerable amount of time, probably 4 years ago, trying to bring agency attention to this matter. I think we spent $130 sending out certified letters to everybody we could think of, saying, help, this is a concern, this is a disaster waiting to happen. And I think the only people that responded was the Railroad Commission, and they were like, yeah, there's a couple violations in the work, check with us in the spring of 2020, which was 2 years down the road, and we'll let you know what happened. And so I do think that, of course, our community is appreciative of the attention, but this is so critical on charting a course forward on how agencies can work together and how they share authority. Because when you have a situation like this, you don't really have time to just getting to know you, getting to know all about you. That takes time. You have to have some level of trust with each other and with your community. And I think for this particular facility, when the agencies were presenting, I could see a wide range of emotions from the agency representatives. Some were very comfortable, like Rachel and Jamie are, and others were so terrified that they were going to get screamed at. I don't know what kind of meetings they're going to that they're getting screamed at, but certainly they're not set up by the LAEJ network. And so for them, it was really refreshing for them. Like they wanted to maybe be engaged more because they, there was a good reception. And so the kind of the ending on that, I know Rachel and others are still working on it. And that's where, when you have trust in your partners, I don't need to be sitting on top of Rachel asking her what's going on now, because I know she's got the ball. And when she doesn't, she'll let me know. And then, we can evaluate from there. But one of the really important things that came out of it is that there needs to be, and I'm using my own words, they need to do a mock kind of demonstration of what would happen in a disaster situation. And had we not known about that, then we wouldn't be able to work with them right now to make sure that the people living nearby are part of that process. Because I can tell you, a lot of people in the community do not know the disaster that is right around the corner that will kill them. And so, I'm hoping that once that information is out there, that another course of action will be on how do you get these facilities that are grandfathered into communities out. And so, it'll be a process, but as Rachel was saying earlier, one thing we uncovered is this transportation corridor of how things come and go from the neighborhoods. And really, nobody's really watching that. So we hope that this effort will also inform planning so that in the future we don't keep making the same mistakes over and over again. So I can't tell, Rachel and everybody from the agencies how grateful we are to finally be seen again, and really just to reiterate our commitment to create and to continue to have these safe spaces so we can try and figure it out together, without, of course, people yelling at each other, but hopefully that it will be done before we all die, because seriously, it's an accident waiting to happen. So thank you so much, Rachel and the team.
Cynthia, thank you for raising that. It really does frame for us another element of the part of the MOU that we should also make sure we have time to talk about, which is the rapid response effort. So we'll go to that, but first let's hear from Ken again, and then from Adriana.
Okay, thank you very much. It's great to hear the success story of these tools, the activity log and compliance tool. I think actually my question here is because as Jimmy mentioned, when you look at the result, I think the concept is simple, like we put all the related agency together, but it's the effort. So I'm not sure the success is because of the tool or because of the person. And so the tool, for example, like people, this is a protocol, people can just do this. But if we have a different set of people, I'm not sure this will work. So we have to think about how can we duplicate this kind of, and I don't know if aside from cloning people, I don't know if we can do this successfully. So this is my question is, we need to look at, even though we are very successful, but I know like Rachel and Jamie, if we have more of them, then yes, it's going to be successful. But if we don't, the tool by itself is not going to be working. That's the first thing. The second thing is also, I think both of you are working from the EPA, which basically hierarchical wise, you are on the higher side. So for example, if I work with either the air district or a DTSC, it's like I don't know if this is going to work. So so this also we need to think about this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ken. You're right about the commitment to efforts like this. And I just will say, as a shout out to so many colleagues across all of our boards, departments, and offices, you heard earlier from Florence Garibian, who previously worked for DTSC and really was a catalyst for a lot of action to respond meaningfully to community concerns. So, there are so many people in the agencies that are wanting to do work in a better way. I know it can be frustrating if you're not immediately connecting to them, but trust me, they're there. Right,
sorry, I know we're trying to move on, but is it okay just to quickly address?
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of what you brought up are things we're contemplating, and you can say it's the people, but there are things embedded in that. Training, leadership. We've actually talked a lot about training. It's a lot more internally focused, so it hasn't been part of what we're discussing today, but it's been part of what we're thinking about getting, our enforcement folks to think more like this and to have that capability. And then the other part is that leadership component and kind of designating and deputizing folks to feel empowered to take that ownership in that way. And so, yes, there are certain people who might be, more or less situated, but there are ways to kind of organizationally adapt to make, more people in that position to be able to assume that role. So it's a really good point and part of what we're thinking about, even if it's not the basis of our conversations today.
Thank you.
I can just add one thing to that. I agree, actually. Sometimes my number one plan for dealing with things is cloning. I know that's not very realistic. I am super, super privileged to work with amazing colleagues. And I'm just going to name the ones who have their cameras on, but Rachel, Jamie, and Delby are just so fantastic to work with. I know there are many more on you, and apologies that on here, apologies that my screen doesn't accommodate all of them. But I think, Ken, you make a super important point, and I worry sometimes that some of these, because so much of it is about sustained relationships and trust building, it does become very personal, and it can be very personality driven. But part of the goal is also sort of friendly amendments to just additional points, amplifying what Jamie was saying, is also kind of modeling it, because I think there are an extraordinary number of dedicated, talented, committed people throughout the Cal EPA family, meaning all of our boards, departments, and offices. And I think hopefully it's what Deldy and Luis were talking about. We just put forward these models and show concrete examples, and then hopefully they catch on like wildfire, because I think there are so many dedicated public servants in our state system, federal as well, local as well. And hopefully by just putting out concrete examples, it catches on.
Thank you very much.
Right, Adriana and then Katie.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name, of course, is Adriana Roth, and I'm from the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board. I'm the community engagement coordinator as well as tribal coordinator. And what I just wanted to say is just go back to basics. If we want to have a relationship and form trust with our community, is local events. I just had a tribal consultation 2 weeks ago, and the tribal leader was explaining to us, where are you guys when we have events? You guys want us to trust you, form a relationship, and go to your workshops. But when we're having events, I don't see nobody from the quality board here. And so I think it's having those moments, talking to community, sharing a meal, with somebody, just grab a hot dog, whatever. And what, our agency is doing this and that with environmental justice, and the community member, what, I'm interested in that, but I didn't know that you guys, were committed to that. Form the relationship and the trust. You know what, go to our website. We're going to have a workshop next month, and that person is going to tell another person, and then we're going to have more community within our purpose or agencies, trying to work with them. And every community has different needs. And through those events, we're also going to hear from those different needs that each community has. Maybe there's a community leader that we haven't spoken to or met yet, and they have different ideas than what we think of or what we're talking here. So I think begin with basics, then we'll go into the data, and we're going just from bottom, to the top. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. Really insightful observations. Thank you for sharing. Katie.
Thanks, Deldy. I wanted to also respond to Ken or add on, but Adriana, that really resonated with me as well. Just the need to get out in person and meet with people. And I think I could go on and on about anecdotal stories about how important that is. So thanks for bringing that up. And earlier in the discussion about people versus models and programs, Ken, really made me think about this question. It kind of begs the question of how policy or legislation might be able to codify changes that would trigger maybe an interagency task force like the one you led, Rachel, so that it's not so dependent on the person sitting in that position to have the initiative to take the action and convene the work group and convene the task force, but sort of beg that question for me of whether there might be a policy change that when there's a facility like Jones Chemical that's so close to communities and has these certain very hazardous aspects just about its nature, that might trigger this more robust interagency response. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Rachel, of how policy could be utilized to kind of strengthen that possibility of future workforces and succession, the succession plan on that work living on.
I think it's certainly worth thinking about. You know, when I think about something like that, I also have a small amount of panic about sort of additional requirements being layered on without also the additional staffing and resources and ability to execute effectively. Because I think in all of these spaces, we're sort of very mindful about wanting to be able to effectively follow through and follow up on commitments, and wanting to make sure we have the bandwidth to do it. And so I think it's, you know, that it's worth thinking about if there are productive changes that could push and facilitate the sort of replication of this type of engagement, while also being mindful of the need to sort of think about what that means in terms of resources and making sure that whatever policy change is married with the resources to actualize the outcomes we want to see.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Thanks for that. And Katie, just for the record again, would you mind, so many of us know you, but just your affiliation.
Yeah, thanks, Deldy. Katie Butler with the Supervisor's Office, Janice Hahn, 4th District in LA County.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, and we struggle with that same question as far as, you know, resources with our own local task forces to be able to, you know, tackle one by one facilities versus having a more, you know, countywide response. So yeah.
All right. I just again want to thank everyone for your conversation, the ideas that you shared, your reactions, the history that so many of you who are in communities dealing with these issues have shared with government folks, to the goal of helping us do our jobs better, right? Just this morning, I was speaking with an advocate from Richmond, and you know, she said, I shouldn't have to become an air quality expert in order to get action in my community. And she's absolutely right. And so, you know, the expectation that government, in fact, should not be competitive with each other and should, in fact, be collaborative with each other, that should be a given. And I'm so grateful for spaces like this one that you, Cynthia, and Rabina have created for with leadership, of course, from Florence, from so many others. I see Stephen Leonardo John there from the LA Field Office for EPA. You were such a big part of this as well. Just creating that space for us to not come together out of like attacking, but to really problem solve. And so thank you both for making that happen. And thanks for inviting all of us to be part of this conversation today. I want to turn it over now to our amazing co-host, Cynthia Babich, for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Deldy, and really thank you to everybody that participated today. I think just a little bit of reflection on our journey this year. We had 5 symposiums this year. We started off with supplemental environmental projects, and I think that discussion led to conversations within the agencies about how they might be able to learn the good lessons and then get their programs back going. And there were some discussions, I think, within Cal EPA, a little bit to one of the conversations today from, from Perry about the steps and what happens if you're not selected. And I really appreciate that the agencies are trying to take a look at, once a proposal comes in, trying to see if it might fit in other sections without having the person submitting having to go through the whole thing of trying to figure out where the resources come from. We also had a really amazing one that Katie, by the way, moderated on lead and the basics of lead. And, you know, we hear a lot about the big facilities that are in the news and get recognition like Exide and the conversations about that. But again, I heard someone talking about getting back to basics. And so this workshop was really specifically designed just to remind people that there's lead in candy, there's lead in makeup, there's lead in jewelry. There's really an onus on the consumers to keep their eyes open and realize that, you know, not everything is being monitored. And what happens if your child has a high lead level? How can you best advocate for them? And then we had a really important one on land use. That is a personal situation to me. I feel like all roads keep leading back to bad land use decisions. And I see that a lot of the folks down here in LA are really trying to grapple with that and do better. And it's going to take all of us to really fix the problem, especially in areas that are so built out, like down here, there is no buffer zone space anymore. And then last month we heard community voices. Community voices are always so important. And it's always so important, though, too, to remember that, you know, we're telling our stories, but they're very personal and a lot of times traumatic. These are traumatic events. And I'm so appreciative when people come forward. And the reoccurring theme that I saw this year was most of those that spoke had to, in one shape or form, take action of their own and actually raise money to file lawsuits to be heard. This is a problem that really needs to be stopped. And that was pretty shocking. And then today, you know, we're hearing about how agencies are working together across the board to do better. And they're really embracing the communities and letting communities lead and this whole relationship and trust building and how important that is. And, you know, trying to create spaces so your own communities could plug in and be shovel ready for when the agencies, you know, need some help from something that you're working on. I think that's also really critical. All of our symposium workshops have been recorded, and that's so we can share the links with you, and we will be. And so, you know, Perry will be able to go back and watch the SEP workshop and probably get some contacts and some points from that. And so that's really the great hope from these recordings. And also, I really want to say to the agency people that we're really trying to model during our workshops what we would like to see from the agencies on their Zoom calls. We have an open chat. We can see who the participants are. You're allowed to unmute and mute yourselves. You're visible if you want to be, and if you don't want to be, you don't have to be. And we trust that our partners are in control of themselves, and we don't need to have control of that. And that is so critical. Especially when you're trying to bring new community members on board. Some of us that have been around for a while, good luck getting rid of us. It's just not going to happen. But you're really turning off the next generation that's going to be taking these things onto their shoulders. And so, you know, really what we've been doing at this workshop and all the ones this year and the years before is, you know, sustaining the relationships that we built and, you know, making new strong ones that are going to last for decades. The connections that we make, as I said earlier, are really people that we trust all across the board, bringing in their personal capital of people who they've met that are trying really hard to make a change. And I appreciate that you trust us enough to bring in that kind of capital. It's really critical. And so we hope that these symposiums have been helpful. We'd like to know from people, you know, what could be helpful next year. There's a survey that we'll put into the chat. We hope that you fill it out. It really determines on whether we have a 9th year. We're not having these just because we're getting pretty good at them finally with all of your help. But if there's a need, then we want to continue. If not, we can move on and do other things. You know, would people want to meet again in person next year? We can't answer these questions for you. So, you know, please do us a favor and fill out the survey. And finally, I just really want to thank all the attendees that have stuck through it. I usually track the attendance throughout, and we've had a pretty steady group, and that really leads to how the conversation has played out and the thoughtfulness of putting this together. And I also want to thank our sponsors. You know, it's a lot of work. A lot of the agencies put in their own staff time, and we appreciate that. I'm not sure how much that racks up on the bills, but I know that, you know, Sarah, Robina, and I are fairly exhausted by the end of these, but we also want to thank those who have put in capital and resources, and that would be Community Environmental Services, the California Air Resources Board, Earth Justice, the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office, the California Environmental Protection Agency, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, Sheila Kuehl, Janice Hahn, Holly Mitchell, and Hilda Solis, and the South Coast Air Quality Management District, and of course, one of our partners, Cal Recycle. And a special thank you to our moderator, Deldy, a lifelong friend. We will follow you forever. Keep, sprinkling the magic dust wherever you go, because that's like super important. And our exceptional speakers today, Linda Lyle, who I'm just getting to know and has been delightful so far. Thank you so much for taking the time, not only to speak, to be here for the whole workshop, and to Rachel and Jamie and Luis and all the commenters. We can't talk to a wall or talk to a mirror, and without that important feedback, it's just really a one-way conversation. And again, just to the California Air Resources Board, part of what they did for resources for us this year is give us an extraordinary Zoom team. We have Helena throughout the whole time, and today we had Octavia, and we really appreciate her help, as well as the amazing translators. Mark Gutierrez has been with us all along. Today we had Leticia. It's super important and critical that we don't just stick to one language. We're barely getting a grasp on getting a good job with recording the Spanish, and hopefully in the future, we can branch out as the need be. And also, I just really want to say that Stephanie is always there behind the scenes, helping to make sure that our voice is heard and that things run smoothly. And, a special thank you to my colleague, Robina, who salt and pepper we complement each other really well, and it ends up hopefully being pretty sweet in the end. And this year we also have Sarah Garibian, is amazing young talent that's been working with us and really has brought us to another level with her smart wit and her helpfulness and just being really quick and spry and eager to be engaged. And I know that we want to give her a lot of credit, but I do know that some credit does go to her mother, Florence, who raised an amazing young woman who has all the right spirit and everything going forward. So thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Florence, for having her. And thank you all. And please do take a moment to fill out the survey. Robina and I read them all. And, that's what I do after I take a little nap after these. Then I curl up with all the comments and ways we can do things better. So thank you all so much, and great appreciation. Have wonderful holidays with the people you love, and get lots of hugs and get energized, because we have the 2023 implementation plan, and we all want to be there to help our agency partners move forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Really appreciate this. Thank you. Looking forward to working with everyone more.
Thank you, everyone. Great meeting.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Cynthia. Another excellent gathering.
Well, it takes a village. Thanks for being part of ours.
Sure. Thank you.
All right, I will close the Zoom room now. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Helena.
Thanks, Helena.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.